an incredibly important singer-songwriter in terms of both Indigenous and Australian music, and a doctorate in several languages as well. It's a pleasure to welcome Lou Bennett to the Australian Music Vault.
Thanks, Jane. How are you doing?
Good. Lou, you've got an inordinate amount of strings to your bow. Do you remember as a child the first, I guess, song you ever heard, or the first artist or music that was played in your household? What are your earliest musical memories?
That's a big question. I've been singing since I could walk. Singing with my family. My family are all singers or performers. Whether they can sing or perform or not, they still think they can. And it's been a culture in my family, of course, through the Indigenous side of my family, but also the non-Indigenous side of my family. All loved getting together around the campfire or around the kitchen table, pull the guitar out, and the oldies would have a couple of beers and they'd start to sing anything from a white sports coat and a pink carnation to Ma, just Molly and me and baby makes three. So I had an amazing plethora of music at my feet, at my hands grab as well. So from that, those old timers, now we can call it, old time music, to sort of the modern 70s music, 60s and 70s, both black and white music as well, a great array and diverse range of music from, say, Simon and Garfunkel, to Stevie Wonder, the Carpenters, to Roy Orbison. So, yeah, I was very blessed. I had a lot of music in my childhood.
Your mother was Indigenous. Is she still around?
She's still around.
So your mother's Indigenous, your father's Australian.
Yes.
That must have been an interesting time for you growing up in a chuka, in a household. Was the music the glue that bonded your parents together?
Look, whatever bond it was, the love, I know my father and my mother grew up together in Echuca. And like you said, it was an interesting time in the 60s for both black and white people. It was quite I wouldn't say segregated in the sense of something like South Africa, but there was certainly, that's the black side and that's the white side. And even my own parents, both families had to come to terms with the two of them marrying in 1968 when I was born. And it was when I came along, because I'm the oldest, I came along and my family fell in love with me. They nurtured me. They of course saw this little brown kid barefoot and swimming in the brown water and running in the dirt, and I've always had that protection around me, still to this day, and I'm 48 today, I'm 48 years of age. Always had that. So I suppose for me, family has been what's kept us together, the values of family. And the music goes within that. It's not something separate. When we have, like I said, family gatherings, there's always music being performed. We're always having a sing. We're always having a laugh at each other performing, and that's how it's always been.
Do you remember the first time you ever stepped out onto a stage?
I do. And I was terrified. And I remember, so my uncles on my mum's side had a band called The Shades, and back in the 50s and the 60s, they performed around the Riverina area, around Echuca, where I was born, up to Leeton, down to Melbourne here, and they would do dance hall music, mostly of that 50s and 60s era. So Everly Brothers, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, again Roy Orbison, John Denver. So it was like a country rock, repertoire. And they finished up, went and had their careers and established their own families, and then they came back 20 years later, and I was the sweet age of 18, and they asked me to join the Shades. So I got up on stage with them with an ironing board and my little Casio, a little Casio keyboard player, and I also borrowed a guitar from one of the uncles, and that was my first go at public performance. And I was performing to a pretty full house at the Echuca Workmen's Club. You know, good 200 people would have, well, it felt like 200 people. It might have been only 20, but geez, it felt full. And I remember the first song I sang, and it was a Tracy Chapman song, Fast Car. And I remember my voice, you haven't got a fast car, I got a ticket to anywhere. And I was that nervous. I had all this vibrato in my voice. And when I got off stage, my childhood friend Dion had said to me, I didn't know you could sing like Tracy Chapman. You never told us that. I was like, well, I can't actually. It was just the fact that I was so nervous that I ended up getting this natural trill in my voice. And so they've always reminded me of that.
What happened to the Shades?
Well, the Shades, they're all still alive, bless, thank goodness. And at family gatherings, they sometimes still get up and Uncle will bring out, the brushes, and they'll get the acoustic guitars out and we'll have a bit of a sing-song. So they've never disbanded, they've always been around, and I think they'll continue to be around until it's their time to head to the dreaming.
Do you still perform Fast Car these days?
No, I don't. Oh, my goodness. I don't know if I could even play it on the guitar and sing it at the same time anymore.
In the 90s, you formed a trio called Tiddas, who were very, very successful. In fact, one of the few groups at that time, and certainly Australian music was going through a rebirth or a renaissance in a sense, where alternative music was certainly de jour. It was certainly, Australian music was going through a rebirth, and record companies were signing Australian bands. And here was Tiddas, three friends, and they broke through onto the, you were played on Triple J, you were played on commercial radio, you were accepted and embraced by mainstream white Australia, I guess. Would you like to give me a little history about Tiddas?
So early 1990s or even late 1980s, and we were with a band called Jambi. Jambi is an Aboriginal word that is a masculine sort of, I suppose, a masculine term that means friend or soulmate. So you would call a male person a Jambi. And so we had a band called Jambi, and we were with that band for a couple of years. I was with them for about 18 months. And the other girls, we joined together, of course, and became the backing vocals of this band. And also I played some rhythm guitar. From that, we would go out and, of course, tour with them. We went over to New Caledonia, we toured up to Sydney, we'd done lots of shows in Melbourne. And it got to the point where our aunties who would come to watch us couldn't hear us. And so they would they'd say on the side, we love the boys, but we can't hear you. You've got to get out on your own. You've got to, have a crack at it. And so we thought, well, when we get the chance, we will. And of course, the chance came about. Auntie Ruby Hunter, bless her, she organised a show called Hot Jam Cookin'. And it was organised through 3CR Community Radio. Janina Harding was another one of those who organised it. And it was a wonderful night, or 2 nights, celebration of both black and white women coming together and showing their wares, basically on stage. Whether you could tap dance, whether you could sing, whether you could tell a story, whether you could clap stick and tell jokes, it didn't matter. It was time for women to be on stage. And that was on August the 10th, 1990. And I remember it was at the Richmond Town Hall in Bridge Road here in Richmond. And it was a wonderful night. So many people turned up to see women perform on stage. And we didn't have a name for ourselves. And we were going to say, we said, well, maybe we should call ourselves Women from Jambi. And Auntie Rube said to us, no, you can't call yourself Women from Brothers. It doesn't make sense. You're my Tiddas. And we went, oh, of course, yeah, we are. We're your sisters, yeah, that's right. And hence that's where the name come from, Fruani Rube. And we toured for 10 years. We were signed to several record companies at the time. And I suppose we had something really unique to offer, and that was 3 women's voices together. The majority of the band was Aboriginal, so that was myself and Amy Saunders. And that was another unique thing, that because often would be one person being Aboriginal and being the minority in that group, but of course it was a bit different. And the fact that we were women, that we were 3 young women, and we weren't going to change for the mainstream. If you liked us, then come along. If you don't, there's the door. And that's pretty much what Amy Saunders would say at just about every performance. If you like our stuff, stick around. We'll sing, and we'll sing until midnight. We'll sing until the sun comes up. But if you don't, there's the door. Leave us be, and we'll leave you be.
What was the highlight of being in Tiddas for 10 years?
The friendship. For me, the friendship with Amy Saunders and Sally Dastey and our manager, Jill Shelton, and even our sound engineer, Janine Temmie, it's a friendship that will stand the test of time. And through music, through the experience of travelling together, world touring, national touring, remote touring, local residencies here in Melbourne, over those years, we've still, in some part, have stayed friends and have a closeness that I don't think I've ever had with anyone else, which is really lovely.
What impact do you think you had when you visited those remote areas, and when I guess people of your culture got to see, you know, a majority indigenous group with voices singing their hearts out, who are having great success?
Well, there was quite an extreme, from sheer adulation to having to leave a town and ushered by the police onto a bus because we near caused a race riot. So,
what happened?
So I won't name the town, but we were at a place and we were performing, and you know, there were seats all set up, and we were getting ready, tuning, and we were, you know, oh, this is great. We're in this quite remote area, and I'll say it was in the Northern Territory. Anyway, we get to this particular bar, and they've got all the seats set up, and all the white fellas go to that side, and then there was a what do you call it, a corridor or a little aisle, and then on that side all the black people sat. And we thought, wow, that's a bit strange, you know, as young 22-year-olds. And then we started to sing, and, you know, people were clapping very quietly and politely, and then a few more beers went. And then one white fella came up to the stage and said to me, "Play something for the white fellas." And I said, "Oh, but sir, that song that we just played, that was about someone white. That was about my grandmother on my father's side." "No, you're not playing anything for the white fellas. You're playing everything for the black fellas. Play something for the white fellas." And he got quite violent and aggressive, and I was ready to tear his head off. But we calmed down and we finished our set. And by the time we'd left, because of that tension between black and white, and here we were just wanting to sing together, they got riled up, and we were, like I said, we were ushered onto a bus at about 1 o'clock in the morning. There was a police escort, and then, you know, taken down south to a bigger town, a more diverse town, a more accepting and tolerant town, and and continued our tour, and that was back in the early 90s. And then, you know, on that same tour, we went to a community, and they had bugger all, and the local DJ, or one of the local musicians, had a bush PA. We had one microphone stand, and it was a boom, but it was also a straight one. So we had one microphone going that way, and he had gaffer taped 2 microphones onto that one, like this. And so we all had a microphone, but it was quite squashy. And they put us on a basketball court at night time. And so all the lights, you know, or the nighttime came, and there was no one. There was no one in this basketball court. And we thought, oh, great, all right, well, we'll just have fun. We've been paid to sing for about, I think, 2 hours or at least a good hour and a half. And, you know, we're sitting on the back of a station wagon playing, and then we started to hear the audience clap, but we couldn't see anyone. And then all of a sudden, all of these little spot fires outside of the basketball court light up, and we started to see faces. And it was all the mob sitting outside of the basketball court. And they weren't going to come into that basketball court because that basketball court was dry. So they could at least sit back and relax and have a sip and sit by their fire and listen to us perform. And of course, when all the lights came on from the basketball court and around the area, all these mob, there would have been about 100 of them, just got up and walked back to their homes. And, you know, so you go from one extreme, you know, to the other, and that was remote touring. Mm.
You certainly you were one of few bands of Indigenous culture. I remember at the time that Yorta Yindi were very, very big in the 90s as well, and they had the massive hit Treaty. But there was a band called the Wurrung band that I guess it's fair to say paved the way for Indigenous voices to be heard in a Western, well, certainly in the Australian music industry, in the Australian music scene. Can you take me back to first hearing the Wurrung band?
I remember my big sissy cousin, Gabby, loved them, and she had their tapes. But the very first time I saw them was on Countdown, and I was at home with my mum and dad, and my dad, I remember him yelling out to Mum, "Vron, come in here, come and have a look at this." And there he was, big brother George, who's now passed away, and skinny little legs and dancing and, singing in, I think, again, singing in Lurcha, and it's the song Jalango Pagano. And, of course, they've made their own video, and I was amazed. I was like, oh, yes, this is fantastic. This, for me, is Australian music, the mixture of language and rock and roll, and, like two cultures colliding, or even many cultures colliding in that one song and that one idea. And it was, later down the track when I got older and I became a musician myself, that I started to perform with Wurrung in the 1993, and Tiddas, we done a tour with them, and I was just in awe. Here I am thinking, back when I was like a 16-year-old or 17-year-old in a small country town, watching, the iconic Countdown with Molly Meldrum on it, and thinking there was such a distance, but there wasn't such a distance. They were right there, and here they are travelling with us, and here they are singing songs and sharing songs. And that particular trip, I remember Neil Murray, the composer of My Island Home, said, "I want to play you this song. I want to give you this song. I want to give this song to Tiddas." And he did. He sang My Island Home with George and handed that song to us. So the Tiddas sang it after that, and of course were celebrated for passing that song on. And then eventually later, Christine Anu, little Chrissy, came out with it, and it hit mainstream in another way, which was wonderful for the men of Wurrung and for Neil as composer. It helped sort of set the stage for Indigenous and non-Indigenous musicians to come together and use something that's so old and so embedded in this country.
So Wurrung were trailblazers in a sense. I mean, I know
absolutely.
I know that Indigenous music goes back way back to the beginning of time, but certainly, I guess, again, in that Western mindset, certainly.
And that adaptation of Indigenous idea of music. It's our It's our blood, it's our healing, it's our way of education, it's our way of teaching, and it's our way of mapping this country. It's our way of finding medicine, it's our way of finding home and way of looking after the country when we sing to the country. And for it to cross over into a mainstream, that was really clever. And that, you know, like you said, they were at the forefront of that. They were the pioneers. They were the first to do that.
So after Tiddas, how long after did you form Black Armband, which is a project that's for you ongoing and current?
Well, I'm no longer with the Black Armband, but I still feel connected to the Black Armband through the musicians and, of course, through the producers that are now have taken the baton on. That was part of it. That was why we set it up in the first place. And so I'm not just the only one that's a part of that. There's a whole collective of musicians and producers that saw something really important to set up. And I'd finished with Tiddas in 2000, and I dabbled in theatre and as an actor and a musician and a sound designer. And then in 2005, 2006, I was approached by the City of Melbourne, and they asked, would you like to come on board on this show? And it was a show, it was a project, and it was called Murundak, or murundak. Murun in my language means alive. Murundak means our life, or alive, for all of us, including everyone. It's inclusive when you put the ak at the end. And that was the name of the first show, premiered in October. I actually think we were just over the way at Hamer Hall for 2 nights, and it was beautiful. We realised that it was more than just a show, and we realised that the Black Armband wasn't just a band, it was a movement, and it was something that people really celebrated and still do today, and celebrate how important Indigenous culture and storytelling and the way we do things, the process of how we do things, the way we write, the way we sing, the way we walk, the way we talk, how important it is to honour who you are in your own self, but in your own community. And for me, Black Armband was that. So then in about 2009, it was decided that myself and another producer would pull together the company. So I was on the ground working that company, making sure that the funding agencies knew what we were doing, that we were shifting from a project into a company. And they're still here today, and they're still singing and still reliving and creating new material.
What challenges do you face being an Indigenous artist here in Australia?
I think it's a hard one to say because I've never been non-Indigenous. I can't separate myself from that. But I know that I work really hard, and I know that some days I'm invisible, and that can wear down on you. That becomes like a fatigue. And especially, like I said, talking about the differences between the way Aboriginal people do things and non-Aboriginal people do things. They're just different. And sometimes that dominant culture overrides what we get to do. And it's learning how to live with that, or learning how to stand up for that now in my later years, learning how to stand up to that, learning about decolonisation and re-engaging and reinstating my cultural protocols and my language, my practices every day, my religion, my way of singing, not just singing for recordings or for bajalan, for money, but singing for the country and the health between my country and myself, the discussion between myself and my country. And I can only really do that with Aboriginal language.
And how many do you speak, Lou?
So I'm learning. Well, I've been learning 2 major languages, which are my 2 groups, Yorta and Wurrung. But I do sing in 13 Aboriginal languages, and that was because of Dirt Song a production through Black Arm Band, and it took us all over the country. We also got to sing, and I also sing in Miriam, which is Murray Island TI language. So there's 14 languages. It's a beautiful thing to be able to do that, and it's a beautiful thing to be able to share that with other Aboriginal people around the country. When we start to say, oh, what's your word for earth or country? Oh, my word's Yorta. Oh, my word's Rua. Oh, my word's Jargon. Ours is Jokin, and we start to go through all of these moments of sharing our different languages. And then we sing together, and it just knits us together.
Let's go back to Dirt Songs, a project that you worked firsthand on. Can you explain that to the uninitiated?
Yeah. So Dirt Song came our third production, Murundak, Hidden Republic, and then Dirt Song. The producer had come to me. Actually, we were just sitting outside of this building having a coffee, and he'd asked me, Lou, what would be the show that you would do, never mind about budget, what would be the show that you would like to leave as a legacy or leave, as something that you'd like to contribute to? And I said, well, first of all, it'd have to be a show completely in Aboriginal languages. And I said, and I would probably pick those languages of the artists that we have in Black Arm Band. And so it was.
Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, exactly. It was an amazing process too, because from that point, then we had to gather the ideas and the concept. We also had to learn how to navigate language retrieval. And this was something that I was doing for my PhD. So for me, it was about, practice, research-based practice. And for me, it was a wonderful opportunity to go deeper into exploring what was needed in such a, mammoth show. We had languages from the Northern Territory that are spoken fluently, Yorta and Gunditjmara. And those languages were in one way, quite easy to source. But then one of our singers was a stolen generation, and so was still learning her language as she went. So we had that sensitivity to be mindful of and to be aware of. And then you come back down here to Victoria, and even my own language, Yorta. I'm gathering my language and translating English into Yorta, and then taking it back home to my elders and saying, well, what do you think of this? What does this sound like? And them giving blessing and going, yep, keep going, bringing that back. So that was another part of the process of cultural protocol and respect for my community, respect for my elders. It was heartbreaking and bittersweet at times, because here I was gathering this language that I wasn't allowed to speak in primary school, that there was no sign of it anywhere. And then there were other members, and another stolen generation member artist who was looking for his language and had never even spoke a word of his language or had acknowledged speaking any of his language. And bringing non-Aboriginal people, and as in the form of linguists, in was another sensitivity that we had to look at, and we had to move through it to get to the other side. So this whole imposition of our language being stripped from us, now being imposed back on us by the same culture who'd taken it away in the first place, was very traumatic. But the outcome was the gem. The outcome was that we got to sing in our language, and that we're still singing in our languages, and that we now have the capacity to create other songs and another depth of understanding of our languages. So there were 13 languages, 13 Aboriginal artists, As I said, from Paluakani to Rawa to Gunditjmara, Yorta, Gumbangir, Kukuyalanji. These are just some of the names. Auntie Rube's language, Ngaranjeri, Uncle Archie's language next door to mine, Wurrung, which is really close to my language of Wurrung, Bunjalang. So all these different languages circling around us. And when we wrote together as Indigenous people, and then we took it to non-Aboriginal artists and musicians, and then they shared their hearts with us. And there were really emotional times. Really, we'd get through a version of something and then we'd all break down into tears, or you could hear a pin drop. And then we'd have to start again and rebuild. And the likes of Eugene Ball and Ian Granditch and Julian Wilson, who were our fellow arrangers, were very sensitive to that and patient, and came on that ride with us, wholeheartedly.
You said you had 13 different artists with 13 different languages. How many do you think have been lost over the hundreds of years?
Look, there's many statistics, Jane, and it's alarming at the rate we're losing languages. And UNESCO believe that by the end of this century, most of our languages in Australia won't be here if we don't do anything. There's been a huge resurgence of language retrieval through song, through the arts, through education, but through our own communities. Having the strength to move through that trauma and come back to that place where that language is a feat in itself. And I applaud every single Aboriginal community that gives that a go, because it's a lifetime commitment. You don't just go, oh, how do you say this and how do you say that? You've got to immerse yourself in it for it to be any good. There's 250 languages, they believe, in Australia, roughly 500 dialects. I believe there's more. But that's a fairly conservative measure or number. And like I said, as we go, we build on those languages, and we have to redefine what is a dead language and what is not. We have to redefine what is worthy and what is not, and that's up to Aboriginal people to do.
So after you redefine what's worthy, what would you like to see happen as far as your language?
Well, like, taught in schools, in songs.
That would be a great outcome,
ABC's song picked up two of the songs that Tiddas performed, Inane and Wakaniniana, which was my first song I wrote in Yorta. And it was an amazing time again to see finally there's Aboriginal language in the ABC National Songbook. We're not just learning about peanut butter stuck on the roof of my mouth, or I can't even remember half of the songs anymore. But there it was on the national landscape. Tiddas had made a big mark.
Well, let's go back to Tiddas. There are two songs that we especially want to look at, explore. Koori Woman.
Koori Woman. I was at home in Echuca. I was back and forth at school, at university, and I remember it was I only picked the guitar up when I was 19. My uncles wouldn't teach me. They all were guitarists, but they would not sit down and teach me the Western practice way. I would have to sit with them when they were playing around the campfire or around the kitchen table and watch. They never handed any of that knowledge to me. So anyway, I knew two chords roughly, E minor and A minor. And I remember finding these chords on the guitar and singing out to my mum. And she was off to go out. I think she was going to hang the washing out at the back. And I just yelled out, "Koori Woman, where you going?" And I thought, oh, that's great. And I didn't realise that she she'd heard me, and I get a call back. I'm just going out to go get the washing. But I continued, Koori woman, where you going? And it became a bit of an anthem for Tiddas and for a lot of Koori women. And I was asking her, where are you going to go, Mum? You know, Mum's always taught me, be strong in your identity. You have to choose. You have to choose whether you're black or white. You know biologically who you are, but your identity, who are you going to align yourself with, or who does your body and your spirit align themselves with? And that for me is what that song is about Koori people standing strong in who they are and believing and loving and nurturing their own selves.
And can we talk about My Brother?
My brother.
Is it about one of your brothers?
Well, actually it was someone we considered our brother. We called him the Irish Aboriginal, and he was our sound engineer for the previous band that we performed in Jambi, and he'd actually written the words on a trip we took to New Caledonia, and we were in a little place called Saramia, surrounded by beautiful Kanaki people at a Pacifica festival, and he had an accident which meant that he couldn't actually do his job properly because he was part of the crew. He'd cut his foot, and so he was on crutches, and it actually gave him time to sit down and reflect on his behaviour, on how he got himself in the trouble in the first place. And those words came from him, and he handed the words to Sal to then for the three of us to find the voice of that song, and we did, sitting out in the heat in tropic New Caledonia, and it was Sally Dastey's melody that drove us, and so she sang, "My brother has many faces," and it was the call then for Amy and I to pick up and to create the base of the sound, because it's an a cappella tune. Some white, some black, some yellow, some red. But he is still my brother. My brother has many problems. And again, so he's talking about the problems of drug addiction, alcohol addiction, consumption, not loving themselves. But when I see my brother, I will take his hand. I will embrace his spirit, and I will call him my brother. Big harmonies. And it was about that. It was about embracing someone who was damaged, making sure that we don't sort of judge people because they're damaged, that we actually help them, as they're the ones that will show us the way. They're the ones that will pick themselves up and be the strong brothers. Culturally,
there's a message there too, isn't there?
Yeah.
Lou, if I could ask you about the Australian Music Vault. You're on the committee for the Australian Music Vault, and you're helping oversee this incredibly historical project. What are your thoughts about it?
Oh, well, first of all, I feel really, really honoured to be a part of an amazing advisory board from people like yourself, Dobe Newton, you know, and Kirsty Rivers, Jen Morris. There's such a plethora there of skill and talent. And I think it's really important for us as musicians, as artists, producers, people in the arts industry, in the music industry, to have that tribute, to have that landscape, that space that honours what we do. So often we get left behind. You know, I'll tell you this story. My dad, when I first became a musician, and said, "That's it. I'm not. You know, I'm giving up teaching. I'm going to be a muso. I'm going to be a rock and roll star." And he just was like, "Oh my goodness, when are you going to get a real job? When are you going to get a real job?" And it wasn't until probably about the 8th year of me performing that he went, "Now I know you got a real job." We're constantly fighting that stereotype. So for things like the music vault, for me, it shows that we have a sense of not only belonging but meaning and purpose in our society, and it does get played over by sports and politics and commercialism and all sorts of other aspects that are in our society. But music is, in our culture, is part of our healing and our sense of who we are. It tells us every day who we are and our connection to the country and our connection to everything, bird life, plants, other animals, people, spirit, wind, earth. And for me, that's just a sign of it. That's just a small sign of that respect, because it is in the bigger picture, even though it's a big project. It's a small start when we think about it, when you consider what else goes on in our society. So I'm hoping that this is an opportunity for musicians and producers and venue owners and promoters and everyone that's involved within the arts and the industry are able to rejoice and be acknowledged. That's what we're after. We're looking for is acknowledgement. And so we're acknowledging our own wondrous musicians and singers and those people that keep our music alive and continue to do that for the next generation.
Well, as you said, Lou, music has the power to heal. It comforts us. It guides us. It often puts the pieces of our broken hearts back together too. How do you view music as an agent of change?
I can't see it any other way. For me, music is, again, and this might be the teacher coming out in me, the educator. It is about sharing that change, and the change for the better, not just change and going backwards, but moving forward. Music, as they say, is the universal language. It cuts through cultures, religious beliefs, lifestyles, and the diversity of that. Everyone enjoys some type of music. As far as the agent of change, it will always be an agent of change. I find it very difficult to just write music that means nothing, because it will always mean something. And if it can change a person's attitude to be more empathetic or more compassionate or more understanding or to listen deeper, then it's our responsibility to continue singing.
I always view treaty as an agent of change in itself, as a work in itself. I think that was such a powerful message that was, here's a song that, was traditional by its very nature, and then a dance producer gets hold of it and makes it a dance floor smash, but there's such a message, an agent of change message, if you like. Yeah,
there's a deeper sense of something more powerful going on than just a simple do-up, love you song. And look, there is a place for that, but there is also a major area for those songs. That platform needs to be nurtured as well and expressed and evolved and developed, so more songs of change, more music of change can continue.
Yeah. I'd love to see the young people writing knee-jerk reactions to what's going on in the world. I don't think there's enough of that at the moment.
Exactly. And, I'm hoping that eventually that will happen though, Jane, that we will have protest songs again, that we will start hearing about no more war. We need peaceful time. We need people to be more compassionate. We need our men to stand beside us, not in front of us with a fist in our face. We need to have these changes, and we need them now.
If you could meet your 18-year-old self who was warbling Tracy Chapman's Fast Car with the Shades on stage in your first performance, if you could meet her today, what would you say to her?
Oh, goodness, Jane. I think I would say listen to your instinct. Listen to your gut. If something doesn't feel right, don't do it. Don't pick up that cigarette. Don't pick up that drink. No. Well, you know, part of that, I don't drink, I don't do that anymore. And it's taken me a while to get through that. But I think if I was able to listen to my gut, and I would tell other young women and men, listen to your instinct. It's our magic. It's who we are as human beings, not just as Aboriginal people, but as human beings. We all have that magic to understand when something's not right. Because if your stomach's not right, then something's not right.
Lou Bennett, it's an absolute pleasure to talk to you as part of the Australian Music Vault today. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Jane.